Welcome to this podcast on the basics of copyright for science students. By the end of this podcast, it's my intent that you should be able to explain what copyright is, identify what materials copyright covers, and identify situations involving fair use, and know how to obtain copyright permission and how to use it in your own works. So what is copyright? Copyright is a form of legal protection that gives the owner of the material the right to benefit from others' use of it by publishing it, displaying it, distributing it, selling it. And the materials that are involved are anything that exists in a fixed medium. They can be artistic, they can be graphic, they can be musical, or they can be text-based. So what can you copyright? Printed materials, most materials that you find in books or in published papers in a technical journal, anything electronic, such as a web page, or code like software. Email can also be copyrighted, and anything that's visual, such as a photograph, a web page graphic, a dramatic presentation, a movie, or the lyrics for a song. Copyright protects the form. It's important for you to understand, but not necessarily the substance. The intellectual substance can be protected by a patent. And how long does this copyright provide protection for the work? Based on the Sonny Bono Copyright Protection Act, established in January of 1998, known as the CTEA Act. It protects the work for the life plus 70 years. And prior to 1978, it protects any work for a total of 95 years. So what isn't protected by copyright? As I said, your ideas. They enjoy a different form of protection. So if you come up with a novel idea for a process or an instrument, that's protected by a patent. Other things that aren't protected by copyright are familiar symbols. You can't copyright your name, so I can't copyright Pam. Anything that's considered a common property, or things that you do while you're working under the employ of someone else. And works that you develop through your normal course of employment, we call those works for hire. And the owner of those works is your employer. So, students, here's a question for you. Who owns the copyright to your papers? And my answer is, I suggest that you look at your university's student handbook. So we're going to look at Northeastern University's student handbook as an example. This is available on the internet, so I've provided a link at the top, a clickable link, so you can actually go and see the pages. But in the current version on pages 52 to 54, you'll read the extensive policy that pertains for students. And my answer in short is, who owns it? It depends. And I'm going to provide a short excerpt that sort of gives you an idea of the considerations that are involved. Except if provided above, the university owns the copyright to any work created or developed by one or more students with the significant use of funds, space, facilities, equipment, materials, or other university resources. So as a student, you could be working on a project in a class. For example, at Northeastern, it might be in chemistry, bioanalytical chemistry, where you're working on an original project. Or you could be a student and you are doing your undergraduate thesis work. Any of those could be owned by the university. And you might be saying to yourself, well, why? That's my original idea. Yes, but you've made extensive use of the facilities. You have spoken with and enjoyed the benefit of your faculty members' ideas. They have influenced the work, may have helped to develop it, inform the analysis or the interpretations of it. And so all of those factors may lead to the university being the owner of any copyrightable materials. Does it matter if you hold on to your idea and then you leave the university? Well, again, you have to look carefully at the policy, and the one that's crafted on Northeastern University's page makes it clear that temporally you have a responsibility for things that are developed before and after leaving the university, if the university has helped to inform those works, to ensure that the university can copyright and benefit from that intellectual property. So students, make sure that you're aware of your intellectual property rights. So how do you go about copywriting a work? It's automatic, I'll say, upon the creation of that work. You don't have to publish it, but it really helps if you file in the United States with the U.S. Copyright and Patent Office. So that's easy to do. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and there's great benefit because by registering, you're basically establishing a public record of claim, and that's going to help you in the case that somebody does infringe on your rights, to be able to, in a court of law, prosecute them. So how do you know if a work is copyrighted? Typically, you will see the copyright symbol, the little C with a circle around it. It'll provide a year, and it'll provide the name of the owner of that work. So I've written here copyright 2001 American Chemical Society, to let you know that a professional association like ACS can actually be the owner of a copyrighted material. Typically, if the person has taken material from another source, it could be a figure or a table, and they're showing it in a presentation, or they have included it as a figure or table in a review article, then you will see evidence in written form, like the following: reprinted with permission from, and then it will provide the full citation for the work, and that will be followed by the copyright symbol, the year that the material was copyrighted, and ACS, American Chemical Society. So important note is this isn't required by law, but it's important for you to know that the absence of the evidence doesn't mean, if you don't see it, that those works were not copyright protected. And that's important for you because you could unwittingly infringe on someone's copyright. So you need to read carefully, do your research. Fair use is an important concept both for faculty and for students. You have the right to photocopy, Xerox, or to print a PDF file and to retain one copy for the purposes of private scholarly research. But you have to be careful about this. You can't make a copy and you can't distribute it. And if you are at a company, the company has to be careful about copyright, and you as an employee have to be careful because the company has a responsibility, if it wants to provide that particular work for its employees' use, to actually purchase that work, not to have each individual go and obtain a copy. So as a student, do you have to obtain copyright permissions when you reuse a work? Absolutely. And again, I'm going to refer here to Northeastern University Student Handbook. And again, I would encourage you, if you're at another university, that you want to do your homework and take a look at your own handbook. But page 48 under section 31 states the following: compliance with copyright law use of university information systems has to comply with provisions of copyright law and fair use. Copyright law limits the rights of a user to decrypt, copy, edit, transmit, or retransmit another's intellectual property, including written materials, images, sounds, music, and performances, even in an educational context, without permission, except where such use is in compliance with fair use or the Teach Act provisions. In other words, as a student, yes, you have to follow the law. So if you're going to include a figure or a table or a graphic in a presentation or in a paper for coursework, yes, you have to obtain copyright permission. So I feel a little bit embarrassed, but I need to point out that instructors do not often do as they should. And so sometimes instructors are a poor model for students in terms of copyright. Instructors are supposed to request permission in writing, and I want to emphasize that to you, from whomever holds the copyright. And they should, and as I will say to you, that you should keep a copy of this dated request. And instructors should be inserting the permission, evidence that they've obtained copyright permission on any reproductions, whether it is a slide in a presentation slide deck or on any printed materials that they Xerox and hand out in class. And instructors have a responsibility only to make the requisite number of copies that they have requested in when they have obtained copyright permission, and they can't reuse and keep reusing year after year. When you obtain copyright permission, it's for a finite period of time. And as I hope I'll show you here, it's pretty easy to obtain copyright permission. And so you can do this every year. You can do it very quickly within a few minutes. So a number of you are going to be involved in publishing papers as you are a student. And what you may not realize is that when you publish a paper and you're an author on a published work, someone, it may not be you, maybe a person who's called the corresponding author, has on behalf of the authorship team signed a copyright transfer form that transfers ownership of that copyrighted work to the publisher of that journal. There are certain rights that you and your co-authors retain in terms of being able to reuse and disseminate that work. And this depends, what rights you have depends on the specific publisher, the specific journal. So I have excerpted here from the ACS a portion of the copyright transfer form in regard to what rights you retain. So with ACS, you can transmit copies up to 50, and these days they track that electronically of your work. You have permission to disseminate a certain number of copies, and you can post the title of your paper, you can post the abstract, and you have the right to use the figures and the tables in your in any derivative works that you might use. So as an author, you may not see this copyright statement appearing when someone's presenting their own work, but if you're presenting someone else's, then you're going to need to obtain that permission. And again, you may not be aware of this copyright transfer taking place if you're a student and an author, but I would encourage you, you should be a part of any discussions relative to your own intellectual property. So can you post a copy of a PDF of your paper on your own website? Not likely. You're going to need to read carefully, again, the copyright permissions statement in regard to the rights retained for each publisher of each work that you have. Now, how do you obtain permission in order to reproduce materials in print or as part of a presentation? It's really easy. And I'm going to provide you with an example from the American Chemical Society in regard to a printed work. So if you went to the journal that published the paper that's of interest to you, and it was, for example, Journal of Chemical Education. I've picked my own work in this example. You would on the screen see the title of the work, and somewhere underneath it you're going to see words like are indicated by the arrow here, rights and permissions. You'll notice that's a clickable link. And so when you click on that link, it will take you to what's called Rights Link, which is a major service that works with many publishers, including ACS, in order to fulfill copyright permissions. So for this particular paper, when you go to the Rights Link page, it will have a question or a statement. I would like to, and then there's a pull-down menu, which is frozen here on the screen for you, to show you the choices that you have to choose between. So you have to make a selection and you have to choose. Are you going to reuse this in another article, maybe in a review article? Are you going to be posting this in a presentation that will be on Canvas, our learning management system? Or are you going to be reusing the work in a presentation in a classroom? Your choice here is going to be very impactful and important in terms of what options follow. And you have to make the right one in terms of the specific situation. So I'm going to reuse this in a classroom, perhaps. So I've selected that. And as soon as I've made that selection, I'll now obtain a new screen with a finite number of additional pull-down menus that I'll have to make selections for. In this particular case, because I'm an educator and I've chosen to say that I'm going to reuse this work in a classroom, and it recognizes that I don't have to do a lot of work. And so I'm going to be able to reuse it. That's the first point. But an important aspect of this is I should save this page so I have evidence for someone in case I need it, that I actually have obtained permission to reuse this at work. Now I can't just insert it as a figure or a table into my presentation. I have to let people know I've obtained permission. I mentioned this earlier, and so this second statement here is saying you have a right now to do this, but you need to be careful and you need to make sure that you include this copyright statement. And so it has to appear with each figure or each table that you reuse. Again, depending on your choices, there can be different outcomes. And I want to point out that, if you're intending to reuse this in a way that there might be profit involved, you may end up being required to pay for your purchase. But for the assignments in our course, you won't be doing anything that should require any money to be involved. If you find that you're coming up with that choice, let's talk first, because you're probably made an incorrect field entry. Okay, so that's for reuse of text. how about reusing images? Can I use any images I find on the internet these days? And if I can't, how do I properly credit the author of these materials? So let's take a look. And your best friend here is going to be Google, the search engine. And so let's suppose that I'm making a presentation on mass spectrometry for my analytical chemistry course, and I'd like to use a diagram instead of creating my own. So I can go to Google, and in the search field, as I've done, I can type in mass spectrometer. It really helps, I'll say, if you're looking for a diagram or a figure, if you actually type in that word. But I want you to note that underneath the search field, you can always choose images if you would like to make a choice and see available images. You can also do your search and come up with available videos. So I've entered mass spectrometer diagram because I'm specifically interested in seeing images. And as soon as I do that, the page changes when I hit enter, and I end up with thousands of diagrams on the screen. The important thing to note is I can't use necessarily any of those diagrams. I need to think about the copyright license and their different versions. And the common ones, or common choices, are available to you under the license pull-down menu at right. And there's public domain, which means you're freely able to reuse it. Free to share and use. When it doesn't say the word commercial, that means you can't use it for commercial gain and money. And when it doesn't say anything about modifying, you can't modify that work. So these are all variants, different combinations. Can only use and share, but not commercially, not modify, free to take the work and share it for commercial benefit, free to modify, share, and use commercially. Okay. So I select one diagram that I find on the internet on this page, and I need to make sure if I've chosen one that supposedly is available for free use, that's really the case. And oftentimes you'll do a search, and it may say you can reuse the work, but if you're not careful, you may be reusing a work that actually is copyright protected. So I'm going to show you an example of that. So here's this wonderful picture of a time-of-flight mass spectrometer, and I think, wow, that's labeled, it's clear, I'd really like to reuse it. So what I need to do is I want to click on the view page at right, and when I do that and I am scrolling down the page it leads me to, one of the images on the left happens to be that mass spectrometer diagram, but when I scroll down to the bottom on the lower right, you'll notice there's that darn copyright symbol, and it tells me that there's a company involved, Prentice Hall. You'll recognize a book publisher, so clearly that graphic diagram came from some textbook that they publish, and you'll notice there's a legal notice statement there. So if I'm wise, I'm actually going to go and click on that, and you'll notice it takes you to a terms of use page, and that terms of use page, if you read it carefully, says do not pass go. You don't have permission to reuse this except under certain circumstances, and that includes if you happen to be using that particular textbook in a course. And so under those circumstances where it's a publisher and I'm not using their textbook in the course, I could choose still to use that diagram if I really feel that's the best diagram and that's the one I'd really like to show. But now I'm going to need to contact that publisher, write a short email, tell them how I'm going to reuse that work, and request copyright permission. And that's going to be a little bit of a lengthier process. And so I strongly encourage you when you find a material is copyright protected by, for example, a textbook publisher or the like, you might want to rethink your selection of that work, and you might ask yourself whether it's possible that with a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, you might be able to create your own graphic that might actually be far better than the one you were initially looking at. Or if you feel strongly about it, maybe another equally good choice would be to go back and to rerun your search, and then to spend a little bit more time looking for a diagram that somebody that really does give you the ability to freely reuse. Now, before I leave this topic, I would be remiss if I didn't say the horrible word Wikipedia. So a lot of people think because Wikipedia is on the internet and it's available for free, that all of the figures and graphics and tables that are on Wikipedia are freely available for reuse. And that's not at all true. You need to click on them, just as I encouraged you to click on this particular graphic, view the page, and then read the information that accompanies that figure or table. And a lot of times it will say, yes, you are available to reuse this graphic, but you must credit the author. And under those circumstances, then you can, use the copyright symbol, and you can credit the author and include the year, and you will be all set. But Wikipedia materials, just because something's published on the internet in Wikipedia, does not mean that it is available for free reuse. So be real careful about that. And with that, I'm going to close out by pointing you to a couple really great resources. The American Chemical Society Publications Learning Module that's available for you. It has it's a tremendous resource for chemists and for other scientists. Of course, the U.S. Copyright Office. I really encourage you to go there and point and click and look around. It's a very well written and well designed website, very accessible and very easy to use. And the new ACS Style Guide, it's been renamed. It's called the ACS Guide to Scholarly Communication. And all of these are tremendous resources, and they're all freely available to you for your use. And at this point, you should be in a good position to do the following. Explain to a peer what copyright is, identify what materials and circumstances copyright covers, what it doesn't cover, identify situations involving fair use, and know how to obtain copyright permission and how to use it when you are reusing other people's works in your own works. And with that, I will close out this podcast. Thanks.